our Phase 2 NPDES permit, and I'll tell you a little more about that at the end of the lecture today. I'd like to introduce Mr. Richard Muhl from the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board. And we also have Kathy Gregg, who works with me and helps out with stormwater compliance. Judy Zurion, who also helps out. She also issues permits. And then we have Mr. Dan Burns, who's our building official. So when you see Dan and Dan out together, that normally means you're in trouble. So try to avoid seeing the two of us together. All right. So without further ado, I'll turn over to Richard.
Okay, perfect. My name is Rich Muhl. I'm a senior environmental scientist at the Regional Water Quality Control Board, Rancho Cordova, and I'm a stormwater specialist. So I do stormwater, both industrial construction. I also work with some 401 issues, and then I get stuck with a lot of other projects at the water board too. So I'm going to talk about several things today. I'm going to talk just briefly about the Clean Water Act, just kind of why we're doing what we're doing and why we have to do it. Some regulations, kind of what we expect, the regional board expectations, erosion sediment control BMPs, top problems observed on construction sites, just to give you some insight on what we're looking for as an inspector. And so today this is your class. So as I'm going through, if you have any questions, I'll keep my eye on you. So just raise your hand and ask the question, because if you have it, someone else is probably looking at it too. I want to answer any questions and kind of give you a really good idea when a regional board inspector or a county inspector is looking at your construction site. What are problems? What do they see? Why are they concerned? So you completely understand what we're looking for. And then I'm going to talk about some reasons for non-compliance. There's several reasons why people don't comply. Did everybody get a copy of this, the sheet that WGR handed out? It's really helpful. I think if you follow this, there's some really good guidelines on this thing. Most sites, and I'll talk more about risk levels in a minute, but most sites in Yuba County are risk level 2. And so you have to sample for both turbidity and pH, and you have to do more things. And I'll talk about risk levels again in a second, but this will really help answer some of those questions that you might have. So before the regulations, there were a lot, this is a fire on a river in Ohio, there were a lot of water quality problems, so the Clean Water Act was passed. In 1987, the Clean Water Act was amended to include erosion from construction sites and non-agricultural discharges. So that was helpful, but it really dealt with point sources, things like end of pipe, like a sewage treatment plant, something like that. Stormwater, anybody that's been on a construction site knows, is really diverse. It's spread out, you've got multiple discharge locations, it really doesn't come from a pipe. So the Clean Water Act regulations at that time were not helping. So they basically, this is the first clean water regulations. They were the Phase 1 regulations. So they're for large municipalities, 100,000 or greater, which would be City of Sacramento, City of Stockton, City of Modesto. Large municipalities had to have coverage. In addition, it set a threshold at 5 acres for construction sites. 5 acres or greater had to have coverage. That was helpful, but it really didn't solve the whole problem. So in 1999, there was the Phase 2 permit passed. Now what Phase 2 did is it brought small municipalities, which Yuba County is one of them, and Sutter, and pretty much every county is one of them, a Phase 2. And that's 10,000 or greater, or high growth rate. There's a bunch of things that qualify you for a Phase 2. But it brought those into play. And it also lowered the threshold to 1 acre. So any project that's 1 acre or greater has to file for coverage. So the way it kind of works is the federal government is kind of it's their program, the Clean Water Act, it's federal law. So what we do, they've delegated implementation of that permit to the state of California. So we implement that permit for them, essentially. Then we watch over the county who has a Phase 2. We kind of just pay attention to what they're doing. Yuba County is really good, so we don't do much, but we kind of just watch over and help them when we need to. And then the contractor, everything kind of flows downhill, as you know. So then the contractor kind of implements the program. That's sort of the way it works. Pretty straightforward. So I want to just talk about regional board expectations, what we want to see on a construction site. So the first thing, that any project 1 acre or greater or part of a larger common plan of development, I'll talk about that in a minute, has coverage under the construction general permit. So what you have to do is you have to file what's called a notice of intent. And NOI is basically going to our SMARTS database. How many people have tried to navigate SMARTS? it's not as smart as it should be. So just so you know, we're trying to make it better. The state board's working consistently to make it friendlier, easier to use, because if you don't use it all the time, it gets super complicated. So they're working on simplifying that a little bit. It is better than it used to be, but I work with it all the time, and I still have issues sometimes, so it'll get better. You file a notice of intent, and then you have a stormwater pollution prevention plan. A SWPP is a document, it's a living document, basically it's a plan on what you're going to do to implement BMPs on your construction site. That's really all it is. It can change during the project, so if your engineer provides you with a SWPP, and you get to your construction site, and you're like, why am I putting silt fence on the top of a slope when there's no runoff? I mean, you know, stuff like that. You can change the SWPP and change the SWPP map to fit what's going on. And I just went to a site the other day where they were literally putting silt fence mid-slope in an area where they didn't even have any stormwater runoff. And it was like, you don't have to spend the money to do that. So just change your SWPP and adjust it accordingly. I hate to see people spend money when they don't have to, so kind of be smart about the BMPs you install. Focus on the areas where you need to. Really, if you have a weak point in where the stormwater, where the water runs off, I'll talk more about all this in a minute. You know, focus on that. Try not to focus on areas that really aren't going to be much of a threat to water quality. The SWPP, again, it's a living document, and then you have to implement effective best management practices, BMPs. I'll talk about erosion and sediment control in a few minutes, but those are the key. Erosion control will save you money. Erosion control, what it does is it protects the soil from the impact of raindrops. So when it rains, a raindrop comes down about 25 miles an hour, hits the soil surface, breaks the particles apart, and then it flows off typically as sheet erosion. So that's the primary erosion factor on a construction site. So you want to try and eliminate that erosion. If you kind of think about it logically, if you can just keep the soil from moving around, it's a lot easier than trying to capture it with something like a fiber roll or silt fence or something else at the edge of your project. It's a lot harder to do that. And I'll show you a bunch of pictures in a little bit where that didn't work so well. And then you have to monitor the site. So you're going to go out, you have a risk level 2 site, you're going to go sample for turbidity, and you're going to sample for pH. How many people have sampled for turbidity? So you have a turbidity meter, you've got all the other stuff. Okay. All right. So pretty straightforward, pretty simple to do. Just make sure you're doing it when you need to, because we do check on that when we're doing inspections. And pH typically we found hasn't been a problem unless you're doing concrete work. If you're just doing flat work or you're doing something else, pH could be an issue. Otherwise, on construction sites, it hasn't turned out to be an issue that the state board originally thought it was. So the way this works is the state board kind of writes the permit. There's 9 regional boards. Region 5, I'm in Region 5, Sacramento. That's one of the regions. Then we implement the permit. They kind of write the permit. We have input on it, but they actually write the permit. So we give them a lot of feedback. And one of the assumptions they had is that pH was going to be a problem on construction sites. And it turns out not so much. Still sample for pH, though. If you see a problem, you know, address it quickly as you can. So activities covered under the permit. I want to go through this because there's a lot of confusion. A lot of people do what I call recreational bulldozing, where they just go out and get a bulldozer and they just clear off a big portion of land and they say, but I'm not building, I'm just grading. Okay, but that's included. So you have to get coverage. Any construction or demolition activity, including but not limited to clearing, grading, or grubbing, or excavation. So you have to have the permit before you start. You guys probably all know that. I'm sure I'm speaking to the wrong audience here. But we have a lot of people that just go out and do this grading and say, I don't need coverage because I'm actually not building. Got to have coverage before you start. And so in a lot of areas, when I'm driving around doing my inspections, I'll run across someone that's doing grading, and I have to stop and talk to them and say, you know, what are you doing it for, and that kind of stuff. It also covers construction activity that results, I see a typo on my slide there, construction activity that results in land disturbance of less than 1 acre if the construction activity is part of a larger common plan of development or sale. Easiest definition of part of a larger common plan of development is you have a subdivision, the streets are installed, utilities are in, most of the houses are done, but then there's the rest of the houses that are getting filled in. That's part of the larger common plan of development. The other thing would be where you've got an owner, the owner puts in the streets, the utilities, and then sells off the individual lots. Each one of them is owned by a different builder. Diablo Grande, anybody that's familiar with that around Patterson, good example. That's part of a larger common plan of development. Because each one of those lots is a separate builder, separate situation, different contractor, so they all need coverage. So that's the definition of that. So when you first look at your site, what your engineer, whoever writes the SWPP consultant, QSD, is going to basically take a look at they're going to calculate the sediment risk and the receiving water risk during the period of soil exposure. The longer the construction activity goes, the more chance you have to get into level 2 if you're a level 1 site. We have some level 1 sites that basically are in level 2 just because the whole project takes like 2.5 years, something like that. But typically, in this area, everybody's a level 2. We have very few level 3s. Caltrans is going to have one up in this area pretty soon where they're widening a road. But there's a bunch of requirements for level 3. I think we've only had like 3 the whole time. So we don't have very many, but most of your sites are going to be level 2. Does anybody have any questions on when you need to file for a permit or any of the other paperwork stuff? Because I'm going to start on top problems right now. But have any questions at all? So the big thing is just make sure you're in smarts, get everything uploaded before you start the project. The county is very aware of, our requirements too, and so. Is there a question? No. Okay. So top problems observed on construction sites. The first one is a lack of an effective combination of erosion and sediment control BMPs. This would be a good example. This is a site that relied on road cuts. So what they did is they had the road cuts in, so they said, okay, I'll just retain all my water with the road cuts. The problem is when you do that, they're not engineered. They're not really engineered to capture all of your stormwater runoff. And what happens a lot of times in this first set of rain events we had this year, this happened to a number of sites. The road cut filled up, and if you look right up here, you can see it bubbling out of the storm drain. So what it's doing is just bubbling out of the storm drain. It's going into the creek at the bottom. That's not good. So they, you got to engineer it. So we spent a lot of time at the beginning of the year telling people, hey, if you're going to rely on road cuts, you've got to do the engineering to make sure they're going to capture all this stuff. Here's another site. I just did this inspection very recently in Tuba today. This is a large multi-million-dollar home with absolutely no BMPs at all. So this would be the lack of an effective combination of erosion sediment control. This is in Placer County, but anyway. So here's another one, and what's wrong here is they did put some straw mulch down, but the application is so light. They did blow it, which was good, and they did use a tackifier, but it's so sparse that it really doesn't protect the soil from the impact of those raindrops that I talked about earlier. So what they've got is a ton of runoff coming down, and they're blocking. You can see this. I'm looking down. The street is here. So I'm looking down, they're using all these set of BMPs at the end of their project to try and capture all this water. And you can see it right here too. It's not working, it's turbid water coming out of this thing. So better that they put more straw up here and just keep all this sediment-laden water from coming down. And that's what I suggested they do, and they actually went in. This is in El Dorado County. They went in and they actually did put more straw down and got it pretty secure. It's better now. So again, this is a good example of trying not to put all your eggs in one basket and capture it here because it just isn't going to work. The other problem is the silt fence fell down. And I don't have pictures of that, but that was another separate issue for this particular site. Here's another one where this is a production site. So we've got off-site and on-site, or production, non-production, however you want to look at it. This is a production site, but the problem is two things. One is good housekeeping, which I'll talk about later. But the other thing is the fiber, they have no erosion control. And so what would happen, they've got these kind of weird clay soils, and what would happen is every time it rains, it just discharges off the front, it picks up all the non-stormwater pollutants like stucco waste in here, and the stuff in this kiddie pool, and runs it all down onto the street, and then it flows off-site. This particular project is a risk level 2, and they weren't even doing sampling. So there's a lot of people that are still really confused on the permit requirements, and so we're trying to bring them up to speed. One of the things we're finding is there's a lot of people that have been in construction for a long time. There's a lot of people that understand the construction permit. But when the economy kind of went down, a lot of people got out of the industry. And so now what we're seeing is new people coming into the industry, especially as the economy's starting to really pick up, and they really don't fully understand all the requirements. So we're trying to be as diligent as we can to explain it and make sure everybody understands it. And this particular site got an MOB, and they're making a whole bunch of improvements right now to come up to speed. So that's kind of typically what we're doing. I'm not going to talk about enforcement, but typically what we'll do is if we see issues like on this is too much, but if I see minor issues, what I'll do is I'll just issue what we call like verbal warning. So I'll say something like, hey, you might want that to sort of just fix that area. That's not going to work very well. And what will happen is one of us will come back. We don't have assigned areas anymore. There's 3 inspectors, actually 4. There's 3 inspectors in the field, though mostly all the time. So we could have multiple inspectors in any area on any given day. So I might do the first inspection, identify the problems, and someone like Jorge Beltran or Mike Fisher could come in behind me and do the second inspection to make sure it's been taken care of. So every inspector is a bit different. We all have a different set of eyes, but we're very consistent in what we kind of look for. And we really look for that erosion sediment control, which I'll talk more as I go through the presentation today. But on a production site, you want geotextile fabric or you want some sort of erosion control, or at least have the driveways rock so you can walk back and forth between the houses and not track all over the place. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Here's another one, part of a larger common plan of development. Really simple, one house. It's a house. And what they did is they have the house, the structure pretty complete, and then they decided to grade in the utilities. And when they graded the utilities, they took all the sediment and they side cast all the dirt on the neighbor's property on both sides. And so that started the whole issue. And then in addition to that, they had no BMPs. Here you can see what it looks like in the back, and all this sediment fell on, and there's a creek back there. So they've got a creek back there, and then in addition to that, they've got, no BMPs, they've got trash and debris everywhere. This is one this is becoming a pretty major enforcement thing. They've had to stop work for almost, I think 60 days, almost over 60 days. And so this is, you don't want to get in a situation, I'm sure you won't, but, easy. From erosion sediment control standpoint, it's a couple hours and you can get it stabilized, just fill the trenches in. But you can't do much with a stop work order until they come up to speed with the county. So we work really closely with the county. The county has issues, we have issues. So typically if I see problems and they're significant, I'll get a hold of the county and I'll talk to them and say, I went out, here's what I saw, here's some pictures, can you follow up? Or, we'll probably be back to check, so they're aware of it too. So we kind of work together. The whole goal is to really protect water quality. This isn't about enforcement, it's about protecting water quality. But the bigger thing for me is it's also to level the playing field. It's not fair for you guys. You're in the class here today, you're going to know what's going on. And then you go out, you do what you're supposed to on your construction site, and the guy down the street from you does nothing. That's an unfair economic advantage, and that's really called, that's what we look for. We're trying to make sure that everybody's consistent, and nobody is cutting costs and has an unfair economic advantage. Does that make any sense? Here's another site where we just have, it's sandy soil, it's down south, Turlock, and so there's just a lot of sediment coming off, and it's all running into the street. If they had some BMPs, it would probably help. They have really not much of anything. It's poor housekeeping. Dumpsters aren't covered. Just about everything you can see. So, new superintendent didn't understand what he was supposed to do. Anyway, erosion control is always the key to effective stormwater management. I talked about it earlier. So straw would be the very basic level, but you don't want to blow straw in a 40-knot wind, because it'll look like this, and then the air board's going to go, what are you doing? Now the straw's blowing on the neighbors and they're complaining. So make sure you blow it when it's not super windy, because that can be a problem. But straw does work. It's on flat sites. Straw not so good for slopes, typically. This would be a good off-site. I like this picture just because you've got fiber rolls, rock bags, you've got straw on the off-site area. It's really not much is going to happen. You can see the water sheet flowing off. It's pretty clean. Works pretty good. So this would be an effective combination of erosion sediment control. This would be really good. This is easy when you don't have to disturb it too. It's a little more challenging when you disturb it. Bonded fiber matrix, another Good product. BFM has interlocking fibers. Is everybody familiar with BFM? Probably. It's got interlocking fibers. You can get it. There's a number of different brands out there. Some last longer than others, and it comes in all different types. But it does work pretty well. The problem with BFM, though, you have to install it with enough time to dry. If you install it 2 hours before a rain event, or sometimes even the night before, it won't set up. It doesn't dry. The other problem to think about, if you get multiple rain events, the ground gets saturated, you spray the BFM on it, and it won't, it can't dry because it's wet on the bottom. What will happen then is what happened here. It'll just literally break apart. Same way up here. You can see the turbid water's running right over the top of the BFM and taking it with it because it didn't have time to set up. Same way over here. This rilling should have never happened on monofiber matrix. So there was a lot of water up here, but still, this should have done a better job. We've seen this stuff just melt off and all the BFMs over here, and they sprayed the slope, but it's just because they didn't do a good enough job. It just wasn't soon enough. So when you're dealing with a risk level 2 site, you have to stabilize both active and inactive areas. The inactive areas are 14 days, pretty easy. You haven't done anything for 14 days. Stabilize it, spray something. I'm going to talk about erosion control blanket in a minute. Put on it whatever you want, but some kind of erosion control. It's the active areas where it's really a challenge for you because you're going to go back in the next day, you're going to disturb it. You really don't want to have too robust of BMPs. You just want to make sure the soil doesn't move around. So this would be erosion control blanket. This is a big project, but nevertheless, at the top of the line, erosion control blanket can last anywhere from a year to 10 years. I'm not going to talk about the TRMs, turf reinforcement mats, but they also they can replace riprap and soft armor versus hard armor. That's not in my presentation today, but there's a lot of things that erosion control blankets can do. They work very well. Plastic, a lot of people try and use plastic. You just have a lot of issues with plastic. Plastic is high maintenance. It tends to blow off. This is an administrative civil liability that I had. And our penalties, I'm just going to, so typically what we'll do is we'll do the verbal warning, which I talked about, then we'll write a notice of violation if you continue to have problems. If you get, most of the time we write a notice of violation, the discharger, the contractor, whatever, does what they're supposed to do, problem goes away, I never see another thing. Sometimes people just decide not to. Everybody has a different rate of learning, I guess. And so some people it kind of takes additional enforcement before they sort of come up to speed. And so we'll write what's called administrative civil liability. Now, is everyone familiar with the risk level 2 requirements in the permit? If you go to, there's an attachment, I think it's attachment D or E, one of those. And it'll have the risk requirements. And each one of those is $10,000 a day. So if I go out, I showed the picture of the ones with the good housekeeping issues. They didn't have any sediment control. They didn't have any erosion control. That's $20,000. They didn't have stucco properly maintained. The stockpiling were covered. Another $10,000. So when we're doing these inspections, a lot of times the penalties will add up to $30,000 to $60,000, $70,000 per day. So they add up really fast, so you don't want to go there. This particular ACL was about $800,000 when we were done. And part of it was because they had plastic on the slopes. And so every time I go down to check on them, they'd be trying to put the plastic back on the slope. And it was like, that's not the problem. The problem is the rest of the site, not the slope of the plastic. So here's another one. This just was very recently. This is up in Grass Valley. I was doing an inspection. So they put plastic down before it rained. Well, it seems like the thing to do. The problem is that water was running under or over the plastic. It really didn't matter. It was picking the sediment up, and it was running straight off into the street. And so super high turbidity, no erosion control BMPs, risk level 2. So no erosion control BMPs, and just a lot of sediment moving around. So, they needed to do something else. What they tried to do is they tried to go as hard as they could for as long as they could. They waited till the night before, and then they said, okay, now we're going to install BMPs. What do we have? Plastic. That's all I had. So they used what they had, but they got them in trouble. They got an NOV, and they've now fixed the problem, and it won't happen again. So that's the end of it. That's kind of how it works. Ineffective installation, monitoring, and maintenance of BMPs. This would be a good example. This is what we saw, I was talking about earlier, this is what we saw at the start of the year. They're relying on road cuts. So they had road cuts, the road cuts filled up, you can see the ponded water. Well, there's a berm, but the berm wasn't compacted, it's a temporary berm. And so what happened is it blew out. The water came down and it ran through into this wetland, and here's where I sampled. It was really highly turbid. And again, another site where they pushed right up to the very end. I was actually doing the inspection the night before when it was raining, and they said, yes, we're going to install BMPs, we're going to do it now. I said, it's dark. And they said, yeah, but we're going to still do it. So they did, but it didn't work. So we came back the next morning. As we expected, it wasn't working so well. So just be careful. So what we required them to do is to use the CASPO manual. In the permit, it requires you, if you have a basin, to use the CASPO, California Stormwater Quality Association. In the permit, it has an attachment in there for basin sizing. It tells you how to size that particular basin. You have to use those requirements, and so that's what we required on this site. Now, I've done that with about 7 or 8 sites this year, where they've really relied on road cuts or some other kind of strange thing to sort of hold water for them. Another example, this was also administrative civil liability, ACL. This is a second administrative civil liability this discharger had received from us. He's in Calaveras County. You can see no erosion control, no sediment controls. I mean, sort of, but not really. And he's discharging off-site, and it's super turbid. It was way over 1,000. I didn't figure it out. It was just super muddy. I was there the same day the QSP was there, so for you guys, you'll have a QSD that writes the SWPP and kind of oversees the program. You'll have a qualified SWPP practitioner that actually goes out and does a lot of these inspections. They were there, and they saw the same thing I did. They were very frustrated, too, because there's no BMPs. You can't do much in this situation. Another example, this is using ERTEC. Nothing wrong with ERTEC, but you have to maintain it. This isn't very well maintained. And again, there's really no erosion control up here. So when it rains, the stuff just runs off and creates a problem. This would be better, except for the fact that there's really poor housekeeping. There's like trash and debris. It's worse around the corner, all over here. They did put the driveways in, so at least you can get back and forth without tracking on the road. But really need some kind of erosion control up here too, because it is a risk level too. Another better, the good news is here they've got this, I think, this blanket down in here. And then there's a silt fence. You don't always see silt fence. There's only a couple consultants that use it, so we typically know who they are when we see the silt fence. But it works. It's a good visual barrier. You have to step over it. You're going to think about where you're walking. But silt fence does blow over, fall over, so it can be kind of high maintenance too, especially in a production area like this. Fiber rolls. The thing about fiber rolls is they have to be trenched in. They're round, so you got to dig a trench. I think everybody knows. And you got to trench them in. If you don't do that, they're not going to work. And what I see a lot is fiber rolls, people just throw them in, drop them, and then once in a while they'll stake them, but they're not staked right. So what I do is I take my foot and I try and lift it. If I can lift it up, it's probably not going to work very well. Now once fiber rolls get really wet, they get really heavy, then they'll work. But if they're flat, they don't work. So just make sure you maintain your fiber rolls. For us, there's 2 seasons. The first season, the beginning of the year, we try and get everybody to put their BMPs in place. The second half of the year, what we try and do is we try and get everybody to maintain the BMPs, because most of the fiber rolls are flat. So if fiber rolls like that's not going to work. Make sure, don't replace it before you have to, but when you need to, just replace the sections you need to. This is not a fiber roll. It's good for growing mushrooms. Here's a situation where the fiber roll, really, it's installed fine, it just doesn't have a chance. You need erosion control. It's not the fiber roll's fault, but you can't rely on the fiber roll and then have total bare soil. Here's another example. This is what I was talking about earlier. You can see how flat it is. This is a site that I've been to. This is up in Amador. They already received an NOV prior to this, and now they received another one. So they've now dialed it up, and they're doing fine. But again, there's a different learning curve for some folks. So at any rate, they're doing much better. But you can see there's no erosion control, number 1, but then there's also, this is a risk level 2 site. And then the fiber rolls really need to be maintained. This would be better. There's some housekeeping issues here, but it's also fully in production, so it's kind of construction's a messy process. It's not totally clean. We know what goes on, so we're okay with that as long as it's kind of cleaned up before rain event. But here you got the geotextile fabric, you got the fiber rolls. There's not a lot of space in these lots, so really that makes it that much more difficult to construct homes, especially when you're really tight to the street. We know that. So we have a little, you know, we take we factor all that stuff in whenever we're looking at a construction site. This is another type of fiber roll you can roll, you can drive over. The problem with it is, what happens when the guy pulls out on the street now? Because it's all mud, he's going to track on the street, right? So that's not good. So, you know, it's okay. Buddy's pretty good at this now. 40-yard dumpsters also have to be covered. And so this is why. We're seeing a lot of problems with the larger dumpsters. They're not sealed. They got that back door that opens up. So what happens is the stuff runs out and then runs into the street and into the storm drain. So that's the reason why we want them covered. So cover them with a tarp, get the ones with the lid. There's a lot of options out there. Do the best you can to try and get them covered. I realize when you cover it with a tarp and then you pull the tarp off, all the water falls in the dumpster, and it's kind of like, why did they cover it to start with? So we get that. And we're working with Waste Management, some of the other folks, to come up with a better solution. It took us almost 2 years just to get enough dumpsters with lids out there to actually implement this at the beginning of the permit. So we thought it would be pretty simple, or State Board did, and it turns out it's a bit harder than we originally intended. But this is more of what you want. You know, this thing's kind of bungee down. It's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to blow away. It's covered. If it's wood only, you don't have to cover it. If it's wood only, fine. If it's not wood, then you got to cover it. Tracking on roadways tends to be the #1 complaint. You know, typically we'll call a municipality and just say, hey, can you go check? We got a tracking complaint. A lot of people call in. But this is on a smaller scale. It can also be a problem. This is a production site, but you can see here you've got tracking. All you got to do is put a construction entrance with geotextile fabric or something down. They would reduce a lot of this tracking on the roadway. And you can see right here is the storm drain. It's right here. So, I mean, that's not good. It couldn't be much worse than that. This is tracking, but a different types of tracking. Everybody gets hungry, so everybody wants to go eat. But when they do that, they're tracking over the mud, and then they go stand in the street, and then, of course, you know, see what the street looks like. So this is really all preventable, and it's just a matter of having some sort of erosion control. That's why I personally like geotextile fabric, just because you can walk across it. Picks up the stucco waste, it kind of picks up all that stuff. You just kind of roll it up at the end and get rid of it. But, you know, this just creates problems the way that they set this up. Construction entrance controls, again, you have to have a construction entrance. I don't care how long it is, it needs to be as long as it needs to be effective. I've had people have them that are 20 feet, they work great, depending on the soil type. I've had people where they're 300 or 400 feet and they still don't work. So you sort of got to know your soils, know the conditions of your site, and then you can sort of dial that in to sort of fit what you've got. So here's a couple examples of stuff that isn't working very good. And this is a contractor that should know better. This entrance is way too short. It needs to be, I don't know, or something else, but that isn't working. That's a lot of mud on the street. Same way down here, it's the same kind of thing. Another one, this is a laydown yard. But again, this isn't working. We've got all kinds of issues going on. I mean, that's way too short for this application. It does have geotextile fabric under it, so it's not going to sink. That's good. But it's not long enough to really reduce the tracking, especially when they're pulling off a stockpiling. This is another good thing. I just like this picture. I use it all the time, but it's got sill fence on both sides. And so what it's doing is it's forcing everybody over the top of the rumble strip, and you can't drive around it. So, improper washing of streets doesn't happen a lot anymore, but we do see people that do stuff like this. Dropped a stucco bag when I was out with the county inspector, and they got a hose out and hosed in the storm drain while we were watching. And so I just stood there and he ran off to yell at him. So it was just one of those, right time or bad time. It was just interesting. So anyway. So you want to sweep the street, you don't want to wash the street. I don't see many of these types of sweepers anymore, but what they really do is they just pulverize the soil. They don't work very well. So you want to use a mechanical sweeper. These guys are kind of old technology, they windrow it, but they really don't always help the situation. So you can do what they do in China, you can use a sweeper like this. Or you probably want to use something like this. Something that's really going to suck it up, suck that dirt up, sometimes inject just a little bit of water. It'll clean a lot of clay soils too. It does a pretty good job. The technology's got way better than sweepers now. Also, we're seeing a lot of construction sites also use these tire washers. So if you have a lot of haul, or you got a big project, you got a lot of trucks coming in and out, doing whatever, we're seeing these used. The price of these things is coming way down now. And if we have major issues with tracking, we're seeing contractors go to these things quicker now. You can rent them. It basically reclaims all this water, and it's got a tank over here. It captures it and pumps it back through, and eventually have to replace the water. But it'll reuse it. It tends to work pretty good to kind of clean the tires. And you can also see how robust this construction entrance is. Dust control is an issue in the summertime mostly here. But this would be a water truck spraying. This is down around Fresno, but still bigger issue down there because it's a little drier. Stockpile management. You want to cover stockpiles before rain events. If you have a large stockpile, it's in the middle of your site, and it's not practical, and you're not working off it, you might just want to stabilize it for the winter, some kind of erosion control BMP, and just leave it. If you're going to actively work it, talk to us, because if it's really big and you can't cover it, we've had a number of projects where they have huge stock. Caltrans does this a lot. They'll have a big stockpile they're waiting to do an overpass. And so what we do is we typically have them stabilized. This would be on a production site, so you want to cover it with plastic. This is all the stuff, the stockpiles of sand, as well as the materials. They're all covered. And you can see this is working pretty good, except I just noticed they didn't really install puddle, but it's all right. Ineffective concrete washouts. This is not a washout, it's an orchard. This is not either. What happened here is he had one lot left. So he tried to put everything in one little small area. Obviously it didn't work too well. So this picture's famous and different stuff. But some more examples of poor concrete washouts. Concrete is just, if you want to do a concrete washout, you kind of want to do it like this. These are just hay bales with some plastic, that's cool. As long as it's sealed. We don't care about the solids, we care about the liquids. It's the liquid that's the problem, not the solid. Solid concrete, once it dries, fine. When it gets recycled and used for different stuff, not such a big deal. When it's in its liquid form, that's what we're concerned about. Concrete washouts, these work pretty good. A lot of people like these. But I always tell people, just send it back. Send it back. They have reclaimers on all the trucks anymore. Just send it back. Don't even have a concrete washout if you don't have to. I mean, you can have one, but try not to use it because it just creates problems. So if you can do this and get it, the batch plant was to take it back, they reuse it, just take it back. Placement condition of toilets. Here's some examples of ones where it didn't work out so well. You want to make sure that the toilet is back a walk, not going to fall into the street, and blue water runs into a storm drain. That's kind of the bottom line. So that's where we see some problems. And this is not water. This is not good. And so I was doing a class. It was a field class. We were out in the field. I was talking, and everybody was looking past me. I couldn't figure out why. And I turn around, and this guy's got all this stuff running down the street. This was before, when someone else snapped his photo, it got worse. And so it was this perfect moment of teaching a class and having an actual problem happen. But this thing should not be on the street. It should be back of the street, just so it doesn't fall on the street. So this is kind of what we like to see. I wish these pictures were a little clearer, but it's back a walk. It's got a little walkway up there. It's got some gravel. It's got 5 rolls around. It's staked down. Really not much can go wrong with this. I also understand you move these things, but when you move them, try not to move them on a driveway or put them in the street, or just move them to an area where at least they're not going to fall into the street. And we used to always say 50 feet away from a storm drain, or as far away as you can. That's a good idea. If you see a storm drain and you've got a portable toilet, bad idea. Just move it somewhere else. Get it away from there. Material stockpile areas. You want to have, if you have a material stockpile area, make sure it's in a, you don't have tracking coming off it. I like this one because it's gravel. It's going to work really good. The grade all can get up there. You're not going to create ruts, trap on the roadway, and all that kind of stuff. This is not a good example. This is one, I just took this the other day. They have trash and debris. There's buckets full of stuff. I don't know what's in it, but there's a bunch of buckets full of stuff and other things in this particular laydown yard. And so they've cleaned it up now, but it's just poor housekeeping. If we see poor housekeeping, we always get out, we start walking around, because we do a lot of training, we're going to look for photos. But in addition, we see other problems. Typically, there's other sediment and erosion control problems on these sites. So just, if you have good housekeeping, it's a good thing. So what I'll do, if I'm working in Yuba County, what I'll do is I'll drive a whole bunch of sites. I'll get here, we start kind of weird hours. We work early in the morning, we sometimes work late at night. But we come out, we'll start working, and we'll drive by a bunch of sites. If you have really good BMPs that I've talked about, dumpsters, lids are closed, stockpiles are covered. This is before or during rain event. You've got good erosion control BMPs, you've got good sediment control BMPs. Everything looks pretty fine. I won't even come back. I'll just keep going. I'm looking for that low-hanging fruit. So the way to stay off our radar is just to make sure that you're following those permit requirements. So when you get back, take a look at your SWPpp, and you'll look at that risk level 2 attachment, and it'll say you have to do these things. That's what we do. We go right down that list. That's what we're working off of. So there's no secret to what we're doing. We're looking for those things to be completed. That's kind of exactly what we're doing. Ineffective drain inlet, this would be a good example. These poor drain rock bags are pretty shot, so they need to be replaced. This hasn't ever probably been maintained, so you got to maintain these things. Worse than that, there's a portable toilet here, and so that's not working too well either. This was not good. This one is really recent, and I mean, they sort of have BMPs, but the problem is up here, not there. So, and you can tell they swept the street, but it didn't get very clean. They have some clay soils here. They're really red clay soils. You can't see the red color that's on my screen here, but this is more what you want. But rock bags to me are secondary BMP, or the DI bags, because they're not going to. At that point, you're kind of done. Whatever goes in, I mean, the bag that's in here, the drain inlet, is going to catch cubs and big stuff, but it's not going to catch the fine sediment, and that's what we're concerned about. Most of the pollutants from a construction site are attached to that fine sediment, and they're going to go through, not the cups and bigger stuff, but everything else. And so you really need to deal with it up here, not down here. Storage and materials, everything should be stored in the area out of the rain. So that's the other thing. Before a rain event, make sure that you have everything stored out of the way. Do you have any? I was out the other day and there were like eight bags of concrete just sitting on a pallet right by the storm drain. I mean, someone just could have moved that and it would have solved the problem. So, and they did, but nevertheless, it made us stop and get out and talk to them and look for other stuff. Conex containers, sea containers work good, but just store it somewhere where it's not going to create a water quality issue. That's really all it is. It's pretty simple. Paint, stucco, and concrete discharges. So you should have a washout for everything. The stucco guy should have a washout. The concrete guy already talked about that, but painter should have a washout. Just have a washout for everything, and that kind of solves the problem. Just don't put stuff on the soil surface. So this would be a stucco cleaning out this thing. And this is pretty basic pool. It's just plastic with fiber rolled in. The kiddie pool works really well. This is bad. This is stucco's old picture. The stucco industry has gotten much better at dealing with construction sites. Typically, we don't find problems much. This would be better, where they got stuff covered. One of the problems we're finding, again, is, I talked about it earlier, is there's not a lot of distance here between the house and the street. And so it really jams them in there, and it makes it really hard for them to work and keep the stockpile, and keep the mixer, and keep everything going. So they really have gotten more creative in what they're doing. And you can see this one even has a boom here to sort of help the situations. Saw cutting can also be an issue. This is the city of Sacramento. So at any rate, you want to vacuum it up when you're doing saw cutting. But just that's one additional thing. So I just want to go through this quickly, and so those are. We didn't have any questions on BMPs. Anything I talked about? Anything that any questions or okay. So I want to go through then just some reasons why we think we're seeing non-compliance. Some contractors really clearly don't understand the permit requirements, and that's really frustrating for me personally as an inspector, because if you can't do what you don't know. So I mean, I really want everybody to fully understand what we look for in the state. So if we come out and do an inspection of your site and you have questions, ask them. The biggest thing when we come out to do an inspection is we're going to go to the trailer, we're going to take a quick look at the site, typically on the way there. We're going to go to the trailer, we're going to find somebody, typically the superintendent or whoever's on site. We're going to talk to them. What we won't really want to hear is hear them say, I know we've got some issues, here's what I've got planned, I've got a hold of my erosion control consultant or whatever, we're going to do this, so you can explain what you're doing. We're just gonna let you do it because you've got a plan. I mean, that's about how simple it is. We're likely not to do anything. If there are major problems, we're gonna say, hey, you've got some major problems, we really need to talk about this. You know, we're gonna escalate at that point, but we're still gonna give you an opportunity to fix it, because that's what we do. So, you know, it's about water quality, it's not about enforcement. So that's something to keep in mind. Some contractors don't pay attention to the weather. You know, they're gonna push right up to that last minute. I talked about it a couple times during my presentation, but they're gonna go as long as they can and then say, okay, now let's put BMPs in, but it's too late. We'll start doing inspections typically a little bit before the rain. And so we'll be a couple hours, 2-3 hours ahead of the rain, and we'll be out doing inspections. So we're paying attention to who's gonna be ready, who's not gonna be ready. If you're not ready, we're gonna probably come back when it does start raining and check. So that's kind of the way we operate. Some contractors have a production schedule that outweighs potential fines and water quality concerns. I don't need to explain that one. It's kind of a risk versus reward. We know that some people really push the edge of the envelope and they're just going, you won't catch me. But our job is, we have a lot, again, we have multiple inspectors, we're out covering, we cover a lot of ground during the rain event. And it's not like, it's not a catch, it's really about level the playing field is all this is. And our main goal, again, is to protect water quality and to level the playing field, it says it up there, and to make sure people are compliant with the permit requirements. But if you don't know, ask. That's my thing. If you're not, some sites are super tricky. There's some construction sites that are just really hard to manage. If you have one of those sites, ask for help. We'll help you. We're not going to come out and, you know, if you ask for help, we're going to help you. And we're going to explain the stuff. We're going to explain options. Our permit is very general. We kind of just say, hey, do anything you want. I had a site years ago where someone dropped a couch off and the guy had no drain inlet protection. He had sediment going to the drain inlet. He had no BMPs. He took the cushions off the couch and stuck it on both sides of the drain inlet. It worked really well. Now, the city in that case, City of Sacramento, would not have wanted that, but I didn't really care because it worked. So our permit is really general. So, you know, we don't specify what to do. We're just going to basically say, hey, I just know that isn't going to work or that's not working. But stormwater is really very gray. The reason I like it, it's shades of gray. It's not black, it's not white. You can take the same BMP, put it on one site, it's awesome. You go to another site, you put it over there, it doesn't work at all. And it's soil type, rainfall, a bunch of different things can impact that. So you got to be kind of creative with stormwater, and you got to really pay attention. That's the biggest thing. You got to pay attention to what you're doing. And so, does anybody have any more questions? Because that's pretty much the end of my presentation. Kathy will have my contact information, so if you have any questions at all, just let me know, because I'm happy to help. That's why I'm out running around. Yeah?
Not so much about what you've presented, but I know there's always a form or a report to fill out, and some of them are like several pages, you know. And it seems like I was doing one earlier in the year, and I had no idea what some of the acronyms meant, and you know what was really wanted on it. So,
yeah.
So I don't know how critical those things are, but. You know.
Well, I think knowing the acronyms is important, and I'm working with another group in our office, and they sent out an email the other day that was like 5 sentences that had 12 acronyms, none of which I understood. So I totally get where you're coming from, because I was totally like, what does this mean? So in the permit, there's a list of acronyms. So you can go to the construction permit, and it'll list, you know, best practice priority, you know, right? But it'll list the other acronyms, which is super helpful. I go back to that all the time and say, well, what the heck is that? What's it? You know, so that will help you some. The other thing is, you know, you might consider taking the QSP class. You don't have to necessarily get certified as a QSP, but you might take the class, because I believe you go through all those acronyms and you'll really kind of understand the background. So if you really want to know stormwater, what I would suggest is take the QSP class. If you don't want to take the test and be a QSP, that's okay, but you could still take the 2-day class. You'll still get all the information about the permit. You'll know about the risk level 1, risk level 2, risk level 3. You'll know about the acronyms. You'll know what to do. You know about reporting in smarts. Get all that stuff covered. You'll understand all that stuff. And that's really a quick way. I mean, 2 days seems long, but still, it's a quick way to sort of come up to speed fairly quickly with the permit. I think that's really helpful for just about, and I tell almost everybody that. And I've had a lot of sites where they have a lot of issues, and I said, you know, you might want to just take the QSP class, because I'll help you The other thing, you know, I'm happy to give you my contact information. You can email me and I'm happy to help too, if that helps too. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Here's my contact information.
If there's anything wrong, then Kathy and I get called out. And now I try to do the same thing that Richard does. My first trip, I'll be very nice. I'll ask how your kids are doing. We'll walk through the job site. We'll look at the VMPs. I'll make some suggestions. We'll talk about the general construction permit. And then I'll set a date that I'm going to come back and check again. The second time I come out to visit, everything will be done. Everything will be beautiful. I'll be very happy. We'll shake hands and I'll go away. If that's not the case, and I come back a third time, I'm probably going to be quite grumpy, and at that point in time, I also call the state, and I'll talk to the building inspector, and we'll start talking about how do we encourage you to come into compliance. And that normally means you get a stop work notice. You know, the state can come in and start issuing administrative civil liabilities or a notice of violation. Those are things we don't want to see happen. We would much rather keep everything on the, hey, let's work together, get this into compliance, and not have illegal discharges. Richard talked about there's more than one permit. So everybody pretty much focuses on the general construction permit. But Richard also mentioned that there are what are called municipal permits. And phase 1 was for big cities, Los Angeles, Sacramento, LA, you know, whatever. And that was populations 100,000 or greater. That got dropped down to 50,000. Yuba County has what is known as a Phase 2 municipal permit, which means that we have responsibilities to the state as well as you have responsibilities. Under our permit, we're required to do a couple of different things. Number one is make sure that all development within our area is following the general construction permit. So the county is actually tasked with doing enforcement, doing inspections, doing monitoring, and making sure that everything is being followed. So that puts us in sort of an enforcement role. We also have to do a lot of review on your designs. So we look at new subdivision layouts, we look at actual building permit applications, and we look at how much new impervious surface is going in, how much soil is being disturbed. Most of you don't have to worry about that. The engineers back in the office will get to worry about that, and they'll be talking to us and making sure that everything is put into the permit. Now, we also have, Yuba County has a stormwater ordinance. And when we wrote the stormwater ordinance, we basically went through the general construction permit, we went through our NPDES Phase 2 municipal permit, and everything that's required for those permits got stuck into that ordinance. If you don't have a copy of that ordinance, if you've never looked at it, and you're interested in it, we can get you a copy. It's in PDF. You can go online and just look for Yuba County Ordinance Code, and you can find it that way. Or you can get a hold of Kathy, and we'll send you a PDF copy of it. And then we'll go through all the different requirements that are actually listed in that ordinance. And there's a bunch of them, and I'm not going to bore you with going through all of it. I used to teach 8-hour classes on NPDES when I worked at Caltrans. I won't make you suffer through any of that. But when we do come out to visit you guys, there are things that we're going to make sure that you have in place. And these are things that are important, and we will definitely make sure that if they're missing, that you're aware of them and will help you come into compliance. First thing, when we come out and we look at a project, you had better have a copy of your Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, your SWPP, on site. That's the first thing I'm going to ask for. That's the first thing that Mr. Burns will ask for, or Kathy will ask for. When we go out, we'll say, where's your SWPP? If you don't have one on the site, available immediately, that's a really bad sign. And you don't want to give us really bad signs, because then we start looking at everything. All right? So if you want to keep us away, keep everything nice and clean, and have a SWPP on site. That will keep us happy and keep us out of your hair. Now, a SWPP is a living document. As Richard mentioned, you have to update it. If something's not working, you change what you're doing and you update the SWPP. The SWPP is going to have a map in there, and it's going to show me the location of every different best management practice you're supposed to have on your job site. The first thing I do when I open up that SWPP is I look for that map. If the map's not there, we have a problem. If the map's not updated, we have a problem. You're also supposed to have rain event action plans. How many people have heard about REAPs? And when do you have to have a reef?
Before any rain event?
If you have a 50% probability of a rain event within 48 hours, you're supposed to have a reef. Now, if I go out there and I've looked at the NOAA website and I know you have a 50% or higher probability of rain and you don't have a reef, that's a huge red warning sign for us. And the first thing I'm going to do is say you need to get a hold of your QSP, your qualified stormwater practitioner, and get that reef in here. And then I'm going to start looking around to see what BMPs you have if you're ready for the rainfall event or not. All right? And those are two huge, huge things that we look for. Now, on the back of the handout, I have water quality inspection list for construction sites. This is like going into a final exam in school and then telling you what the questions are going to be. You have no excuse to not get 100% if you know the questions ahead of time, right? Well, now you know the main things that we're going to be looking for when we come out. Is that SWPP there? Do you have the map in place? Is the SWPP updated and maintained? Do you have those rain event action plans? Those are the first three. Then we go through and start looking at everything else. Is everything that's in that stormwater pollution prevention plan, and that's basically a guideline for you, what best management practices you install where and when. And that's what we're going to look at. And one of the things that I hope that you got out of this really, really good slideshow is everything begins with erosion control. You keep the water away from the dirt. You don't let the dirt get suspended in the water. What are the two highest pollutants of concern in California and actually in the nation? You don't know? Turbidity and nutrients. Those are two of the biggest issues anywhere. And everything starts with sediment. Everything starts with those small soil particles because your nutrients and everything else attach to those soil particles and then they travel downstream, especially here where we have clay, which is easily dispersed in water, small colloidal particles, and they grab hold of everything and take it down with them. So the first thing that you want to do on a job site is make sure you have that erosion control in place. Then you look at good housekeeping. That's the second thing. So when I drive through a job site, the two things I'm looking for is do you have that erosion control in place and is the good housekeeping there? Then I start looking at sediment control and then the other BMPs down the line. But everything begins with erosion control and good housekeeping. All right? And then I have all the other different things that we look for on this list, but I'm not going to read it to you. You're capable of doing that. So the big question then for us is, the building inspectors will be going out there. They have this list. They'll be talking to you, and if there's any issues, then Kathy and I will come out. Do you have any questions for us as to how we can help you do a better job? Our goal is that Richard's happy, we're happy, no sediment or debris or any other pollutant is getting into the water. That's our goal. If the county doesn't make sure that all the construction sites within the county under our jurisdiction are in compliance, the county can get in trouble. So first and foremost, I'm here to protect the county. I do that by trying to educate, trying to help everybody come into compliance. But if that's a problem, then we're going to shut things down and we're going to try some other manner of coming into compliance. All right? Quick question, what is the definition of a pollutant? A pollutant is any constituent that is present in sufficient quantity to impair the beneficial use of a receiving water. Now that sounds like something a lawyer would spout out, right? And actually I think that's where the definition came from. But there's a lot of things in that sentence that I just said that help explain the entire stormwater program. A pollutant is anything that is present in sufficient quantities to impair a beneficial use. The next question then becomes, what's a beneficial use? Are all the beneficial uses for all the receiving waters the same? Of course not. That would make it too easy for us, right? So the Feather River has different beneficial uses than the Yuba River, which has a different beneficial use than Oroville Dam or Oroville Lake. So who decides what are the beneficial uses? The regional water quality control boards decide that. And it's all written out in what they call a basin plan. So each regional board for its jurisdiction will have a basin plan that talks about all the receiving waters within its jurisdiction and the beneficial uses for each. And they'll talk about what constitutes a pollutant in what quantities. And in some cases they'll have what they call TMDLs, total maximum daily load allocations. So they'll say, you can only, Yuba County, discharge this many pounds of sediment per year, or this many, milligrams of something else. So my point to you is, there's a lot of science behind this. The pollutants vary according to where you are. The beneficial uses of the receiving water vary according to where you are. You have to listen to your QSDs and your QSPs when they come out and tell you, these are the best management practices you install, and why. Because they're not going to be the same on every job site. And if we come out and we see that there's a problem, if you're testing, because remember, if you are a risk category 2, you have to do 2 types of testing, right? You do turbidity and pH. If your testing is demonstrating you have a problem, you need to change what you're doing, and you need to amend the stormwater pollution prevention plan. This is an evolving, if you want to use the term fluid, area of science. Nothing is going to be absolutely set before you start the construction. You're going to continuously be looking at it and saying, is this working, and if not, what do I need to do to adjust? And that's where, if you call us ahead of time and ask us, we're more than happy to help. We love doing that. It's a lot nicer for us to do that than to come out on an enforcement, all right? So any questions, because like I said, I could talk for hours on this, and if you're a nerd like I am, this is really exciting. I doubt you are, and so it's not. Yes?
I've got one, it's not a question, I've seen hearings about it. On my last job site, I had to deal with, along with the REAP, every 24 hours, I would do another inspection report. Is that only on level 3 sites, or is that on level 2, so we have to do another report every 24 hours during?
That
It's
makes
on
sense.
different, okay, so you have to, it's not just the REAP, you have every 24 hours you do it.
Yeah.
Right, your QSP is supposed to actually come out and visit the job site on every day during a
Yeah.
event. And I think 24 hours after, right? Yeah. So in one day after, they're supposed to come out and just double check and make sure. Any other questions? These are the types of questions that we have to reply. All right, well, I'm not going to belabor the point anymore. If you have questions, please get a hold of us. If you can stump us and make us go back and look something up, so much the better, because then I learned something. And it happens frequently. We also have this really nice handout. And we recommend that you take a look at this. It has a lot of information on there for qualified stormwater practitioners, and you don't have to be a QSP to get a benefit out of this. How many people here are engineers? Okay, the engineers, you know that you can go online and you can actually take an online class and get your qualified stormwater developer, your QSD. Some of you took the actual class in the field. Had the fun part of doing it that way. All right, so anyway, I'm done. If you have any questions, you need to get a hold of us. You can get a hold of us through Kathy. Thank you very much.